My name is Claire Donovan. I'm 29 years old, and the grand opening of my coffee shop, Brew Haven, should have been the proudest moment of my life. The first customer said, "Best latte in Chicago." But the seats reserved for my parents remained ice-cold empty. The aroma of Arabica beans filled the air. The door chimes rang constantly. Sales exceeded expectations, but not a single congratulatory call came through. They didn't forget. They deliberately stayed away. That New Year's Eve, as fireworks bloomed over Lake Michigan, I sat in my empty café, staring at leftover coffee cups, and realized something devastating. Every dollar of my savings I'd invested wasn't just to open a shop, but to prove something. My family, my successful doctor brother, my famous lawyer sister, had always called me the useless dreamer. That's when I decided to change the rules of the game. If your family denied your dreams from day one, what would you do? Stay with me, because what they did next will shock you, and how I got my revenge will change everything. Let me take you back to where this all began, because understanding my family's cruelty requires context that goes deeper than just one ignored opening day. Growing up in the Donovan household meant living in the shadow of two golden children. Luke, my younger brother, was the medical prodigy who got into Johns Hopkins at 17, destined for neurosurgery. Madison, my older sister, graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Law and landed a six-figure job at a Manhattan firm before she turned 25. And then there was me, Claire, the middle child who dared to dream about something as frivolous as artisanal coffee. But here's what nobody talks about in those family Christmas cards. For years, I was the one keeping everyone afloat financially while they built their prestigious careers. When Luke needed help with his medical school apartment rent, $800 a month I couldn't afford, I picked up double shifts at 3 different coffee shops to cover it. When Madison's BMW needed repairs after she crashed it coming home drunk from a law firm party, who do you think paid the $4,000 bill? Me, using money I'd saved for my own dreams. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself that once they were established, successful, making their own money, they'd remember who helped them get there. I told myself that family meant something in our house. I was wrong about everything. The first real sign came when I enrolled in a specialty coffee roasting course at the Specialty Coffee Association. I was so excited. This was my Harvard, my medical school, my stepping stone to something bigger. I called my parents to share the news, practically vibrating with enthusiasm as I explained how this certification would help me understand bean origins, roasting profiles, extraction methods. My father's response? "Claire, when are you going to stop wasting money on these hobby classes and get a real job?" My mother added, "Your brother is saving lives, your sister is working on cases that change legislation, and you're making coffee prettier?" But I persisted. I graduated top of my class, earned multiple certifications, and started developing my own signature blends. I entered local barista competitions and won. I wrote articles for coffee industry magazines. I wasn't just making coffee prettier. I was becoming an expert in something I loved, something that brought people joy every single day. None of that mattered to them. The real turning point came during Madison's engagement party at the University Club downtown. It was exactly the kind of stuffy, pretentious event my family loved. All marble columns and crystal champagne flutes and conversations about stock portfolios. I'd spent $300 I didn't have on a dress, hoping to fit in, hoping to finally be seen as an equal adult with her own accomplishments. Instead, when people asked what I did, my father would jump in with, "Claire is still figuring herself out," or my mother would say, "She's between things right now." Meanwhile, they spent 20 minutes telling every stranger about Luke's latest research publication and Madison's recent courtroom victory. The breaking point came when Madison's fiancé's father, a venture capitalist, actually showed interest in my coffee expertise. He started asking genuine questions about the industry, market trends, the economics of specialty coffee. For 5 beautiful minutes, I felt like my knowledge mattered. like I had something valuable to contribute to the conversation. Then Madison swooped in with, "Oh, don't mind Claire. She just works at coffee shops. She's not really in business or anything." The dismissal was so casual, so automatic, that I realized she genuinely didn't see what I did as real work. None of them did. That night, alone in my studio apartment, I made a decision that would change everything. I opened my laptop and started researching small business loans, commercial real estate, everything I'd need to know to open my own place. If they couldn't see my worth as someone else's employee, maybe they'd have to acknowledge it when I was running my own business. I spent 8 months planning every detail. I researched locations, studied foot traffic patterns, developed a business plan that would make any MBA program proud. I found a perfect space in Logan Square, a neighborhood that was gentrifying but still had character, where young professionals were moving in alongside longtime residents who appreciated quality and authenticity. The loan process was brutal. Banks wanted co-signers, collateral, proof of business experience I didn't have in the traditional sense. But I had something better. I had years of hands-on experience, industry knowledge, and a vision that was crystal clear. I also had every penny of my savings, including the money I'd been setting aside to help my family with their ongoing expenses. When I finally got approved for the loan, when I signed the lease, when I held those keys in my hand, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Pride that wasn't tied to someone else's approval. I threw myself into renovating the space. I stripped old paint, learned basic plumbing to save money, spent weekends haunting thrift stores for the perfect mismatched vintage chairs that would give the place character. Every blister on my hands, every aching muscle, every late night painting walls, it all felt like building something real, something mine. I named it Brew Haven, because that's exactly what I wanted it to be. A haven for people who appreciated the craft, the ritual, the community that forms around really good coffee. I designed the logo myself, chose every piece of equipment based on months of research, developed a menu that balanced accessible favorites with more adventurous options for serious coffee lovers. 3 weeks before opening, I sent my family a beautifully designed invitation. I'd had them professionally printed, thick cardstock, elegant fonts, the works. The invitation read, "You're cordially invited to the grand opening of Brew Haven, where passion meets perfection in every cup." I hand-delivered them during Sunday dinner, my heart hammering as I explained my vision, showed them photos of the renovated space, shared my excitement about finally being my own boss. I told them about the local food blogger who'd already promised to review us, about the community partnerships I was building, about the sustainable sourcing practices I'd researched for months. Luke barely looked up from his phone. Madison flipped through the invitation like it was junk mail. My parents nodded politely, but with the kind of forced smiles you give children when they show you crayon drawings. "That's nice, dear," my mother said. "I hope it works out." That should have been my warning, but I kept hoping. I kept believing that once they saw the real thing, the bustling cafe full of happy customers, the positive reviews, the evidence that I'd actually built something successful, they'd finally understand. They'd finally see me. Opening day arrived with October sunshine streaming through my front windows, illuminating the exposed brick walls and the carefully curated collection of local art I'd hung to support other community creators. I'd been there since 4 a.m., preparing everything perfectly. My hands shook as I unlocked the doors at 7 a.m. sharp. The first customer was Mrs. Patterson from down the street. She ordered a lavender latte, one of my signature creations, and after her first sip, she closed her eyes and smiled. "Honey, this is the best latte I've ever had in Chicago." That moment, right there, should have been perfect. It was validation of everything I'd worked for, confirmation that I'd made the right choice, proof that my dream had wings. But my eyes kept drifting to the 2 empty seats by the window, the ones I'd saved for my parents, the ones where I'd imagined them sitting, finally proud, finally understanding what their daughter had accomplished. They never came, not that morning, not that afternoon, Not that evening when I stayed open late hoping they might surprise me with a congratulatory visit. My phone remained silent. No calls, no texts, nothing. Meanwhile, my cafe filled with neighbors, students, fellow entrepreneurs, all celebrating with me, all recognizing what I'd built. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me. Strangers were more proud of my achievement than my own family. That night, after I'd closed up and counted the register, we'd exceeded my wildest projections for opening day, I sat in my empty cafe and called my mother. "Mom, you missed the opening today." "Oh, was that today? I'm sorry, honey. I had my book club." Book club. Her weekly book club that she'd been attending for 5 years, always on Thursday evenings, had somehow magically moved to my grand opening day. "What about Dad and Luke and Madison?" "Your father had work, and you know how busy your siblings are. Work on a Saturday. Madison and Luke too busy to spare 2 hours for their sister's biggest day." That's when I knew for certain. This wasn't about scheduling conflicts or forgotten dates. This was about them refusing to acknowledge that what I'd built mattered. They'd made a collective decision that my success wasn't worth celebrating, that my dreams weren't worth their time. As I locked up that night, New Year's Eve fireworks were starting to light up the sky over Lake Michigan in the distance. The irony wasn't lost on me. The whole city was celebrating new beginnings, while I was realizing that my family had chosen to stay stuck in their old pattern of dismissing me. But something else crystallized in that moment, something that would drive everything that came next. I wasn't going to beg for their approval anymore. I wasn't going to shrink myself to fit their narrow definition of success. I was going to build something so undeniably successful, so impossible to ignore, that they'd have to confront their own blindness. I just had no idea how far they'd go to tear it down. The months following my opening were a whirlwind of small victories that my family systematically ignored, dismissed, or actively undermined. Each success I shared was met with polite indifference at best, outright sabotage at worst. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me walk you through exactly how they tried to destroy everything I'd built, and how I began planning my response. 3 weeks after opening, the Chicago Tribune food critic wrote a glowing review of Brew Haven. "A gem in Logan Square," she called it, praising not just the coffee, but the community atmosphere I'd worked so hard to create. I was over the moon. This kind of press was worth thousands of dollars in advertising. I printed copies for everyone, hand-delivered them to my parents' house during Sunday dinner. I set the newspaper on the table like a proud child showing off a report card, my heart hammering with anticipation. My father glanced at it, then folded it up and set it aside with the junk mail. "Dad, did you read it?" She called my espresso transcendent. "That's nice, Claire. Could you pass the salt?" That was it. No congratulations, no acknowledgement, no recognition that their daughter had achieved something noteworthy. Madison didn't even look up from her phone. Luke asked if there were any more dinner rolls. But it got worse. Oh, it got so much worse. The first real act of sabotage came through Madison's professional network. I'd been courting a potential corporate client, a law firm in the Loop that wanted to switch from their current coffee service to something more artisanal. It was exactly the kind of account that could stabilize my cash flow and give me a foothold in the corporate catering market. The initial meetings went beautifully. The senior partners loved my presentation, were excited about the custom blend I'd developed specifically for their office culture, and we were literally one signature away from a contract worth $15,000. Then I got a call from their office manager. "I'm sorry, Ms. Donovan, but we've decided to go with a different vendor. We heard that your business might not be stable long-term." I pressed for details, but she was vague. "Just some concerns about your business model, your experience level." It took 3 weeks of detective work through mutual acquaintances before I learned the truth. Madison had casually mentioned to a law school friend who worked at the firm that I was playing entrepreneur and would probably close within 6 months. She'd planted seeds of doubt about my competence, my commitment, my ability to deliver consistent service. My own sister had cost me a $15,000 contract. When I confronted her about it, she acted like I was being paranoid. "Claire, I barely know anyone at that firm. You probably lost the contract because you're inexperienced. Don't blame others for your failures." But I knew better. I started paying closer attention to the way my family talked about me, the way they presented my business to others, and I realized they'd been systematically undermining me for months. At my cousin Jenny's wedding, I overheard Luke talking to our uncle. "Yeah, Claire opened some coffee shop. It's cute, I guess. She's trying really hard to make it work." The dismissive tone, the implication that I was some naive little girl playing with a hobby. It was all deliberate. During Madison's housewarming party, I heard my mother telling the neighbors, "Oh, Claire's still figuring things out. We're just hoping she finds her path eventually." As if my successful business was just a phase I'd grow out of. The pattern was clear. They were framing my entrepreneurship as a temporary experiment rather than a legitimate career choice, which made potential customers, partners, and even friends question whether I was serious about what I was building. But the cruelest blow came during Easter brunch at Madison's house in Boston. She'd invited the whole extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins, even family friends, to celebrate her recent promotion to senior associate. It was a big, elegant affair with catered food and floral arrangements and all the trappings of success. I'd driven 3 hours to be there, excited to see everyone and maybe share some updates about how well Brew Haven was doing. We'd just had our best month yet. I'd hired 2 part-time employees, and I was in talks with a local roaster about a partnership that could expand my wholesale opportunities. When I arrived, Madison greeted me at the door with a strange smile. "Oh, good, Claire. You're here. Would you mind helping in the kitchen? We're a little behind with serving." I thought she meant helping as a family member, pitching in like everyone does at family gatherings. But when I got to the kitchen, there was a coffee service set up. Professional-grade equipment, premium beans, the works. "I thought it would be fun if you did your coffee thing for everyone," Madison said. "You know, show off your skills. Everyone's curious about what you actually do all day." At first, I was touched. Finally, my sister wanted to showcase my expertise, let me demonstrate why I'd chosen this field, give me a platform to share my passion with the family. But as the afternoon progressed, I realized what was really happening. While Madison mingled with guests, accepting congratulations on her promotion, sharing stories about her high-profile cases, I was behind the coffee station the entire time, making drink after drink for relatives who treated me like hired help. "Claire, could you make me another cappuccino? Excuse me, do you have any sugar-free syrups? This latte is too hot. Could you remake it?" I wasn't a guest at my sister's party. I was the entertainment, the coffee girl, the family member whose job was so unimportant that I could be put to work at a social gathering. The final straw came when my Aunt Carol, who I'd always been close to, approached the coffee station and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "It's so nice that Madison lets you practice your little hobby at her party. Maybe you'll get good enough to work at a real coffee shop someday." The laughter that followed that comment, from my own family, is something I'll never forget. Not mean-spirited laughter, but the kind of amused chuckling you'd give a child who announced they wanted to be a dinosaur when they grew up. That night, in my hotel room, I made a decision that would define everything that came next. I pulled out my laptop and started documenting everything. Every dismissive comment, every act of sabotage, every moment they'd made me feel small. Not because I wanted to hold grudges, but because I needed to see the pattern clearly. Then I started researching. I looked up Madison's law firm, Luke's hospital, my parents' social circles. I studied their professional networks, their public profiles, their carefully curated images of success. And I began to form a plan. If they wanted to treat me like I was insignificant, if they wanted to undermine my business and dismiss my achievements, then they clearly didn't understand what I was capable of. They saw me as the weak link in the family chain, the disappointment they had to tolerate. They had no idea who they were actually dealing with. Back in Chicago, I threw myself into expanding Brew Haven with a single-minded focus that surprised even me. I wasn't just building a business anymore. I was building a platform, a community, a success story that would be impossible to ignore. I started partnering with local artists, hosting poetry readings and acoustic music nights that drew crowds from across the city. I launched a coffee education program, teaching brewing workshops that filled up weeks in advance. I began sourcing beans directly from farmers, creating relationships that allowed me to offer truly unique single-origin coffees that coffee aficionados traveled across the city to try. Most importantly, I started documenting everything, not just for business purposes, but because I had a feeling I was going to need proof of what I was building. Every positive review, every successful event, every partnership, every milestone, I kept meticulous records. The breakthrough came 6 months after Easter brunch, when I received a call that would change everything. "Ms. Donovan, this is Catherine Morrison from Chicago Magazine. We're doing a feature on young entrepreneurs who are transforming their neighborhoods, and your name keeps coming up. Would you be interested in being interviewed?" Not only was I interested, I was ready. The interview lasted 2 hours, during which I shared not just my business story, but my philosophy about community building, sustainable sourcing, and the role that gathering spaces play in urban neighborhoods. When the article came out 2 months later, I was on the cover. The headline read, "Brewing Change: How Claire Donovan is Redefining Chicago's Coffee Culture." It was a 6-page feature with professional photos of me in my café, quotes from loyal customers, and analysis of how Brew Haven had become a cultural hub for an entire neighborhood. I had 15 copies delivered to my parents' house. This time, I didn't wait for their reaction. I knew exactly what it would be: more dismissal, more attempts to minimize what I'd achieved, more reasons why it didn't really count as success in their book. Instead, I started putting the next phase of my plan into motion. I reached out to Mrs. Morrison, Catherine from Chicago Magazine, and asked if she knew of any investors or business partners who might be interested in helping successful small businesses expand. She connected me with several people, but one name stood out: Margaret Chen, who owned a small chain of boutique cafes in Austin and Denver. Margaret and I had 3 phone conversations before she agreed to visit Brew Haven in person. The day of her visit, I was more nervous than I'd been since opening day. This wasn't just about validation anymore. It was about building something so undeniably successful that my family's opinion would become irrelevant. Margaret spent 4 hours at Brew Haven, talking to customers, observing operations, tasting everything on my menu. She asked detailed questions about my sourcing, my financial projections, my expansion plans. This was a serious business conversation with someone who understood the industry at a level my family never could. At the end of her visit, she made an offer that exceeded my wildest dreams. "Claire, I'd like to partner with you to open 2 more locations, one in Wicker Park and one in the West Loop. I'll provide the capital and operational support. You provide the vision and local expertise. I think we can build something really special together." I said yes on the spot, but I didn't tell my family about the partnership immediately. Instead, I waited. I waited for the next family gathering, the next opportunity for them to dismiss my achievements, the next moment when they'd try to make me feel small. I didn't have to wait long. 2 weeks later, my parents called a family meeting. "We need to talk about your future, Claire," my father said over the phone. "This coffee shop experiment has gone on long enough. It's time to think about a real career path." Perfect. I agreed to meet them for dinner at their favorite restaurant, the kind of upscale steakhouse where they felt important, where the waitstaff knew their names and their usual orders. The kind of place designed to intimidate, to remind you of hierarchies and social status. They had no idea they'd just walked into my trap. The dinner was set for the following Sunday. I spent the week preparing not just emotionally, but strategically. I printed copies of my financial records, my press coverage, my partnership agreement with Margaret. I practiced what I would say, how I would say it, the precise moment when I would reveal the full scope of what I'd built. But more than anything, I prepared myself to finally stop apologizing for my success, stop shrinking to make them comfortable, stop accepting their narrative about who I was and what I was capable of. That Sunday dinner would be the last time they ever had the chance to make me feel small, because I was about to show them exactly who they'd been underestimating all these years. The restaurant was exactly as I expected. Dimly lit, leather banquettes, the kind of place where my parents felt sophisticated and in control. They were already seated when I arrived, along with Madison and Luke, all wearing the same expression of concerned authority. This wasn't going to be a conversation. It was going to be an intervention. I slid into the booth across from them, my heart hammering but my expression calm. In my purse was everything I needed to destroy their illusions about my failing little coffee shop. But first, I wanted to hear exactly how far they were willing to go. My father cleared his throat. "Claire, we've been talking, and we think it's time for some honest conversation about your future." "Your coffee thing has been cute," Madison added, her lawyer voice in full effect. "But you can't keep playing entrepreneur forever. You're almost 30. You need to think about stability, about building a real career." Luke nodded along. "I've talked to some people at the hospital. There are administrative positions available, decent salary, good benefits, room for advancement. Real jobs, you know." The condescension in his voice was breathtaking. Here was my brother, who I'd financially supported through medical school, telling me I needed to find a real job. My mother reached across the table and patted my hand. "Honey, we're not trying to hurt your feelings. We just want what's best for you. This coffee shop phase has gone on long enough." "Phase?" I repeated slowly. "That's what you think this is? A phase?" "Claire, be realistic," my father said. "How much money are you actually making? Are you even breaking even? These little neighborhood coffee shops rarely succeed long term. We're trying to help you face reality before you waste any more time." That's when I knew they had absolutely no idea what they were talking about. They'd been so committed to their narrative of my failure that they hadn't bothered to learn any actual facts about my business. "What if I told you," I said carefully, "that Brew Haven has been profitable since month 3, that we're averaging $1,500 a day in sales, that I've been featured in Chicago Magazine and have a waiting list for my brewing workshops?" Madison laughed. Actually laughed. "Claire, you don't have to exaggerate to make us feel better about this. We're trying to have a serious conversation." The dismissal in her voice was exactly what I'd been waiting for. I reached into my purse and pulled out a folder. Not dramatically. I didn't slam it on the table or make a big show. I simply placed it in front of them and opened it to the first page. "These are my financial statements for the past year," I said, "prepared by my accountant for tax purposes. Take a look." I watched their faces as they scanned the numbers. Revenue, profit margins, projected growth. Numbers that told the story of a thriving business, not a failing experiment. Luke was the first to speak. These can't be right." "They're certified by a CPA," I replied. "The same firm that does Madison's taxes, actually." My father's face was turning red. "Even if these numbers are accurate, it's still just a coffee shop. It's not like you're saving lives or changing the law." "You're right," I said, flipping to the next section. "I'm not saving lives. I'm just employing 12 people, supporting 5 local artists through commission sales, and sourcing beans directly from farmers in Guatemala and Ethiopia, which provides them with 30% higher income than they'd get from commodity buyers." I could see them processing this information, trying to reconcile it with their image of me as the family failure. But I wasn't done. "I'm also not changing the law," I continued, flipping to the press clippings. "I'm just being featured in magazines, hosting community events that bring together people from all walks of life, and providing a gathering space that 3 different neighborhood organizations use for their meetings." Madison picked up one of the articles, her lawyer training kicking in as she examined the evidence. This is actually impressive. Thank you, I said, but we're not finished yet. That's when I pulled out the partnership agreement with Margaret Chen. This document, I said, placing it on top of the financial statements, is a partnership agreement to open 2 additional locations over the next 18 months, with a projected combined revenue of $2.4 million annually by year 3. The silence at the table was deafening. Margaret Chen, I continued, owns 6 successful cafes across 3 states. She's been in the industry for 15 years, and she chose to partner with me because, in her words, I have exceptional vision and execution skills. Luke was staring at the contract like it was written in a foreign language. $2.4 million? Annually? I confirmed. That's gross revenue, but even after expenses, we're projecting profit margins that would put me in the top 20% of small business owners in Chicago. My mother was the first to try to recover. Well, that's wonderful, dear. We had no idea you were doing so well. The backpedaling was beginning, but I wasn't going to let them off that easily. Actually, you did have an idea, I said, my voice still calm but gaining an edge. You had multiple opportunities to learn about what I was building. I invited you to my grand opening. You didn't come. I sent you press coverage. You threw it away. I told you about my success at family gatherings. You changed the subject. Madison tried to interrupt. Claire, we never meant to. I'm not finished, I said, and something in my tone made her stop talking. You didn't just ignore my success. You actively undermined it. Madison, you cost me a $15,000 contract by spreading rumors that my business was unstable. Luke, you've spent months telling people that I'm playing entrepreneur and trying really hard to make it work, as if competence wasn't a possibility. I turned to my parents. And you two have been telling everyone who'll listen that I'm still figuring myself out and going through a phase, as if what I've built is some kind of extended adolescent rebellion. The family was silent, but I could see the wheels turning. They were trying to figure out how to spin this, how to maintain their narrative while acknowledging the evidence in front of them. The question is, I continued, why? Why were you so invested in my failure that you couldn't see my success? Why did you need me to be the family disappointment? My father tried to take control of the conversation. Claire, that's not fair. We were just concerned about your stability. No, I interrupted. You were concerned about your image. You were concerned about having to admit that the daughter you dismissed and ignored had built something significant without your help, without your approval, and without your understanding. I leaned forward slightly. You were so busy being embarrassed by my choices that you missed the fact that I'm probably going to out-earn both Madison and Luke within 5 years. The prediction hung in the air like a challenge. Luke, to his credit, was the first to really absorb what I was saying. Claire, I didn't realize. I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt your business or make you feel like we didn't support you. His apology sounded genuine, but it was too little, too late. Here's the thing about apologies, I said. They're meaningful when they come before the damage is done, not after the person you've wronged has succeeded despite you. I started gathering the documents from the table. I didn't come here tonight looking for apologies or support or validation. I came here to give you information so you could make informed decisions about how you want to relate to me going forward. Madison leaned forward. What do you mean? I said, closing the folder, that I'm about to become very successful and very visible in this city. Brew Haven is going to expand. I'm going to be featured in more publications. I'm going to be invited to speak at conferences and serve on boards. My name is going to be associated with success whether you like it or not. I stood up from the table. So you have a choice. You can continue to ignore and dismiss what I've built, in which case you'll look foolish and petty when everyone else recognizes my achievements. Or you can adjust your perspective and start treating me with the respect my accomplishments have earned. My mother's voice was small. "Claire, we're your family. Of course we want to support you." I looked at her for a long moment. "Are you?" "Because families celebrate each other's victories. Families show up for important moments. Families don't sabotage each other's success or spread doubt about each other's capabilities." I paused, letting that sink in. "What you've been to me isn't family. It's been an obstacle, a source of discouragement and undermining disguised as concern." The words were harsh, but they were true, and I could see from their faces that they knew it. "But here's the good news," I continued. "I don't need you to believe in me anymore. I don't need your approval or your support or your validation. I've built something beautiful and successful and meaningful, and I did it in spite of your doubt, not because of your encouragement." I slung my purse over my shoulder. "The partnership with Margaret starts next month. We're scouting locations for the second café next week. Chicago Magazine wants to do a follow-up story on my expansion. I'm living my dream, and it's bigger and better than anything I could have imagined when I first opened Brew Haven." As I turned to leave, my father called after me. "Claire, wait. Can we start over? Can we be part of this?" I turned back to face them one last time. "You can be customers," I said simply. "Brew Haven is open Monday through Saturday, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., Sundays 9 to 5. You're welcome to come in, order coffee, and see what I've built." I paused. "But earning your way back into my life as family? That's going to take a lot more than showing up after the fact." Walking out of that restaurant was the most liberating moment of my adult life. Not because I'd humiliated them or gotten revenge. I hadn't been cruel or petty. I'd simply told the truth and refused to accept their version of reality anymore. But the real victory was still to come. 3 weeks later, Margaret and I were featured together on the cover of Entrepreneur magazine. The story was about innovative partnerships in the food service industry, and Brew Haven was used as a case study for successful small business expansion. That same week, I received a call from the mayor's office. They wanted to include Brew Haven in a citywide initiative to promote local businesses, and they asked if I'd be willing to serve on an advisory committee for small business development. The week after that, I was invited to speak at a University of Chicago Business School symposium about entrepreneurship and community building. Suddenly, everyone wanted to know about the young woman who'd built a thriving business from scratch, who'd turned a neighborhood coffee shop into a platform for community engagement and economic development. Everyone except my family. Oh, they tried. My mother started showing up at Brew Haven every few weeks, ordering complicated drinks and talking loudly about my daughter's successful business to other customers. Madison sent me LinkedIn requests and started sharing my press coverage on her social media with captions like, "So proud of my sister." Luke showed up one Saturday morning with a group of his medical school friends, clearly trying to show off his entrepreneurial sister to his peers. But here's what they didn't understand. Success had changed me in ways that went far deeper than bank account numbers or press coverage. I discovered something about myself during those months of building and expanding Brew Haven. I didn't need their approval to feel valuable, and I didn't need their presence to feel loved. The real family I'd built was my team at the cafe, the customers who'd become friends, the community of small business owners who supported each other through challenges and celebrated each other's victories. Margaret, my business partner, showed me what genuine professional respect looked like. The neighborhood families who brought their kids to story time at Brew Haven showed me what authentic appreciation looked like. I'd learned the difference between people who love you for who you are and people who want to claim credit for your success after the fact. 6 months after that confrontation at the restaurant, I opened the second Brew Haven location in Wicker Park. The grand opening was everything the first one should have been, packed with friends, colleagues, community leaders, and press. Margaret flew in from Denver to celebrate with me. The mayor sent a congratulatory letter that was read aloud during the ribbon cutting. My family was there too. All of them, dressed up and beaming, taking photos and accepting congratulations from strangers who assumed they'd been supportive all along. But I knew the truth, and so did they. They were guests at my success, not architects of it. They were witnesses to what I'd accomplished without them, not partners in what I'd built. And that made all the difference. During the ceremony, a reporter asked me about the role my family had played in my entrepreneurship journey. I smiled and said, "My family taught me the most valuable lesson an entrepreneur can learn, that you can't wait for permission to pursue your dreams. Sometimes the people closest to you will be the last ones to see your potential. But that doesn't mean your potential isn't real." The camera caught my parents' faces during that answer, the flicker of recognition, the understanding that they'd been publicly called out for their lack of faith in me, but in a way that made me look gracious and them look small. It was the perfect revenge, succeeding so completely that their doubt became irrelevant, and their late arriving support became transparent and meaningless. That night, after everyone had gone home and I was closing up the new location, I stood in the middle of the empty café and thought about that scared, hurt girl who'd sat alone on New Year's Eve, wondering why her own family couldn't celebrate her dreams. She'd had no idea what she was capable of. She'd had no idea that their dismissal would become the fuel for something extraordinary. She'd had no idea that building something meaningful was possible without their blessing. But I knew now, and I'd never forget. The third location opens next month in the West Loop. Margaret and I are also discussing franchising opportunities. There's talk of a cookbook, maybe a podcast about entrepreneurship and community building. My family still reaches out regularly, still tries to insert themselves into my success story, but the dynamic has fundamentally changed. I'm no longer seeking their approval. I'm graciously allowing their participation. And that, I realized, is what real power looks like. Not needing what they withheld, not wanting what they finally offered, but choosing with complete freedom how much space to give them in the life I've built. They thought they were protecting me from failure by discouraging my dreams. Instead, they taught me that the only failure that matters is giving up on yourself. And I never did that. Not even when they'd given up on me first. Here's what I want you to understand. This story isn't really about coffee or family drama or even business success. It's about something much more fundamental. The choice between shrinking to fit other people's limitations or expanding to meet your own potential. For years, I accepted my family's version of who I was. The dreamer, the impractical one, the daughter who needed guidance away from her foolish ambitions. I absorbed their doubt and carried it like a weight, questioning my instincts, apologizing for my passions, making myself smaller to make them more comfortable. But success taught me something crucial. The people who truly love you want to see you grow, not shrink. They want to celebrate your victories, not minimize them. They want to understand your dreams, not dismiss them. Real family, whether biological or chosen, shows up for your grand opening day. Real family brags about your achievements instead of undermining them. Real family asks how they can help instead of why you shouldn't try. If the people closest to you can't see your worth, that doesn't mean you're worthless. It means they're looking through the lens of their own fears, their own limitations, their own inability to imagine possibilities beyond their experience. Your dreams don't need their permission. Your success doesn't require their approval. Your worth isn't determined by their recognition. I spent 3 years building Brew Haven into something extraordinary while my family insisted it was just a phase. I could have given up when they refused to support me, when they actively undermined my efforts, when they made me feel like my aspirations were embarrassing. Instead, I chose to prove them wrong not through anger or spite, but through excellence. I chose to build something so undeniably successful that their opinions became irrelevant. That's available to you too. Whatever dream they've told you is impractical, whatever ambition they've labeled as unrealistic, whatever passion they've dismissed as a phase, you have the power to prove them wrong through your actions, not your arguments. You don't need to convince them you're capable. You need to show yourself you're unstoppable. The coffee industry taught me about crafting the perfect blend, taking different elements and combining them in exactly the right proportions to create something extraordinary. Building a life works the same way. You take your talents, your passions, your determination, and you blend them together until you've created something uniquely yours. Some people will taste what you've created and immediately recognize its value. Others will need time to develop their palate, and some will never appreciate what you've made, no matter how perfect it becomes. That's okay. You're not brewing for everyone. You're brewing for the people who can taste the difference, who understand the craft, who appreciate the dedication it takes to create something exceptional. Those are your people. Find them, serve them, build your community around them. As for the ones who dismissed you, let them watch from the sidelines while you create the life they said was impossible. Have you ever been told your dreams were too small, too impractical, or just a phase? Have you ever had family members dismiss your ambitions or undermine your efforts? Share your story in the comments below, because sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is tell the truth about what we've overcome. Your dreams are valid, your ambitions matter, and your success, when it comes, will be all the sweeter because you built it yourself, with or without their blessing. Now go make something extraordinary happen. The world is waiting to taste what you've been brewing.